In the village of Ahama, nestled between the golden plains and the mighty river, the elders gathered beneath the baobab tree. Their faces, etched with time, held the knowledge of generations. The village children sat around, listening with wide eyes. "There are creatures among us," the oldest elder, Olumide, would often say, his voice thick with ancient wisdom. "Creatures who walk as humans, but are of another world. They wear the skins of men and women, but their true form is that of serpents. When they are 100 years old, they shed their skin and seek to claim a soul." The children, entranced by the stories, never questioned their meaning. But the older villagers knew better. They had heard of the serpent woman in their youth, and many feared she would one day return to claim another life. In the quiet months that followed, the village of Ahama began to feel a strange restlessness. The wind carried whispers, and the birds flew in unusual patterns. The elders gathered again, their faces dark with concern. "The signs are clear," Olomide muttered. "The serpent is coming." But none of the younger villagers paid heed to the old man's words. They were busy with their work, caught up in the rhythms of their lives. The younger men boasted of their strength, the women of their beauty, and all thought the stories were just that, stories. Then, on the edge of dusk, she arrived, a woman with skin as dark as polished mahogany, her hair flowing like the river itself. She stepped into the village, her eyes cold yet mesmerizing. Her name was Zuria. Though she wore the guise of a woman, there was something unsettling about her presence. The villagers couldn't quite place it. The air seemed to thicken whenever she was near, and the animals in the village grew strangely restless. Kwame, a young man with a heart full of adventure and pride, noticed her first. He watched as she moved with grace, captivating everyone around her. But Kwame did not see the warning in the elders' eyes, nor did he hear their hushed words. All he saw was beauty. Kwame's heart, strong and youthful, stirred with admiration. He knew the elders spoke of strange things, but he dismissed them as tales meant to keep children in line. What is a woman if not a woman? He thought. He approached Zuria, his chest swelling with pride. I am Kwame, he introduced himself boldly, and you are unlike anyone I have ever seen. Will you come to me? Zuria's lips curled into a smile, her eyes glinting with an unreadable secret. I have waited for you, Kwame, she said softly, her voice like honey dripping from a comb. I have chosen you. Zuria's arrival caused a stir in the village. The men marveled at her beauty, and the women envied her grace. It was said that she healed the sick with just a touch and could soothe the troubled with a glance. Her presence seemed like a blessing, and soon the village elders gathered to discuss the matter. They spoke in hushed tones, but they did not dare speak openly in front of the people. They knew what the younger generation could not see. Zuria was not what she appeared to be. Kwame, meanwhile, had already become captivated by Zuria. One evening, under the light of a full moon, he asked her to marry him, without thinking of the stories he had heard. Zuria's eyes gleamed, and she accepted without hesitation, her voice soft as the night breeze. The village erupted in celebration. Drums beat, fires blazed, and everyone cheered for the young couple. But the elders remained quiet, watching the events unfold with heavy hearts. The night of the marriage came, and the village gathered to witness the union. But as Kwame and Zuria stood together, a strange unease settled over the gathering. The firelight flickered unnaturally, casting shadows that danced like serpents on the ground. Kwame, dressed in his finest, took Zuria's hand, but when she touched him, he felt a chill run through his spine. He shook it off, thinking it was just the cold night air. Zuria smiled, her eyes locking onto his, and for a moment the world seemed to spin. The elders, watching from a distance, exchanged grim glances. "It is too late now," one of them whispered. "The serpent has already chosen." As the night wore on, the music and dancing continued. But inside the bride's hut, Zuria and Kwame were alone. Zuria's beauty seemed even more entrancing in the candlelight, her smile widening with every word. She spoke of the world beyond the village, of ancient lands and forgotten kingdoms. Kwame, enchanted, hung on her every word. But deep within, he began to feel an unfamiliar sense of dread. The walls seemed to close in, and the air grew heavier. Zuria, sensing his unease, gently caressed his face. "You have no need to fear, my love," she whispered. "You are safe with me." As the words left her lips, a strange sound filled the air. A low hiss, like the slither of a serpent. Kwame's blood ran cold. Was it his imagination? Or was something truly wrong? Suddenly, Zuria stepped back, her form shimmering before his eyes. Her skin seemed to ripple, shifting in the firelight. Kwame blinked, unsure of what he was seeing, and then, with a hiss, Zuria's form began to change before his very eyes. Her arms stretched and her body elongated, her hair twisted into thick coils. Before him now was no woman, but a massive serpent, her eyes glowing with ancient hunger. Kwame staggered back, his breath coming in short, panicked gasps. No, this cannot be," he whispered. But the serpent's cold gaze held him captive. The serpent, once Zuria, tightened her coils around Kwame, her form now towering over him. "You thought love would save you," she hissed, "but it only brings you closer to your end." Her voice was no longer the soft, sweet whisper of a woman, but a deadly hiss that sent chills down his spine. Kwame fought with all his might, struggling against her unyielding strength, but it was no use. Her coils were too strong. His heart raced with fear as he realized that his only chance of survival lay in escaping her grasp, if he could. Desperation surged through him, and with a final, desperate cry, Kwame shouted into the night, "Ancestors, hear me. Help me, for I have been blind." The winds howled as though the earth itself heard his plea. In that moment, Kwame felt the presence of something ancient, something powerful. The ancestors of the village, long gone but never forgotten, answered his call. A strange energy filled the air, and the serpent recoiled. Her coils loosening for a brief moment, the spirits of the earth rose from the ground, their voices like thunder, calling out to the serpent, warning her to release her hold. The serpent snarled in defiance, but the spirits were relentless. The earth trembled beneath them, and the air crackled with power. Kwame, with every ounce of strength he had left, broke free from the serpent's grip. He fell to the ground, gasping for air, his body bruised but alive. The spirits, furious with Zuria's betrayal, swirled around the serpent. The land itself began to push back against her, forcing her to shrink. The snake hissed in anger, but the forces of nature had already claimed control. With one final, agonized scream, the serpent's form began to unravel. Her body twisted and writhed, shrinking back into the shape of a woman, then crumbling into stone. The once beautiful Zuria was now nothing more than a statue, her face frozen in a look of rage and betrayal. Kwame, breathless and trembling, stared at the stone's figure, his heart still racing. The wind began to die down, and the spirit slowly faded, leaving Kwame alone in the grove. He had survived, but the cost was great. He knew that the village would never be the same. Kwame stumbled back into the village, his body bruised and his mind reeling. The villagers, hearing his cries for help, rushed to his side. He told them everything about Zuria, the serpent, and the battle with the ancient forces. The elders listened intently, their faces grim. "Your courage has saved us," Olumide said, his voice heavy. "But the serpent's power is not easily forgotten. We must be vigilant." Kwame nodded, his thoughts clouded by what had happened. He had defeated the serpent, but what else was out there? What other creatures walked among them, hidden in plain sight? The elders performed a ritual of healing for Kwame, using herbs and chants passed down through the generations. As the ritual continued, Kwame felt his strength returning. The village began to return to its peaceful rhythm, but the shadow of Zuria's presence lingered. The story of Kwame's bravery spread throughout the land, and people came from far and wide to hear of the serpent woman who had once walked as a human. But for Kwame, the healing was more than physical. It was a restoration of his understanding of the world. Years passed, and the statue of Zuria remained in the grove, a reminder of the dangers that lurked beneath the surface of beauty and charm. The elders continued to tell the story to each new generation, ensuring that the lessons of the past were never forgotten. Kwame, now an elder himself, often sat beneath the baobab tree, sharing his tale with the younger villagers. He spoke of the serpent who walked as a woman, of the dangers of pride, and the power of the land spirits. As Kwame grew older, he realized that life was a circle, constantly turning, bringing new lessons and challenges. The serpent, though defeated, would always be a part of the world, but as long as the stories lived on, the village would be ready. The cycle of life continued, and the villagers of Ahama remained vigilant, always remembering the lesson of Zuria, the serpent who had once been a woman. As the years passed, Kwame's story became a part of the fabric of Ahama, woven to the very heart of the village. The younger generation, inspired by his bravery, began to seek out the old stories with fervor. One day, a group of young men and women gathered under the baobab tree, eager to learn from Kwame, the elder who had once faced the serpent. Kwame, his hair now graying and his movements slower, sat cross-legged before them, his eyes still sharp with the wisdom of ages. "You seek to understand," he began, his voice strong despite the years. "But know this, the world is not what it appears. The serpent will return, and when she does, she will not come as she once did. She will take on a new form, a new disguise. It is not just a woman who walks among us. It is every creature who hides their true nature." The young ones listened intently, their hearts heavy with the weight of his words. They had heard of Zuria, but the lessons were not just about her. They were about life itself. The earth, the spirits, and the creatures who walked in secret all had a role to play in the balance of the world. One evening, a cold wind began to stir, sweeping through the village. The elders gathered once more in the sacred grove, feeling the ancient energy shift. Olumide, now frail with age, spoke softly, his voice trembling, as if with the weight of a terrible memory. "The serpent has been defeated. Yes," Olumide said, "but the land remembers. The earth is never truly still. We must be vigilant, for the forces that once walked among us may rise again in another guise. Kwame nodded gravely. The elder's warnings had always been filled with a deep, unshakable truth. He had defeated Zuria, but he had not defeated the curse that tied her to the land. There was always another lesson to learn, another challenge to face. I will watch, Kwame vowed, his voice steady, though his heart beat faster at the thought. He had lived through the terror of Zuria's deception, and he would not let it happen again. Several months later, a new face arrived in Ahama, a stranger whose presence seemed to command the attention of the village. This time, it was a man who walked into the village at dusk, his tall frame casting a long shadow. His name was Niazi, and though his eyes were kind, there was a coldness about him that chilled the bones of those who crossed his path. Kwame, ever cautious, watched Niazi with suspicion, sensing that something was not right. The man spoke little, but his words carried weight, and his charm was undeniable. Women in the village fluttered in his presence, and men admired him, though some could not quite place their trust in him. But it was Niazi's eyes that unnerved Kwame. They seemed too knowing, too calculating. Kwame could not help but wonder if the serpent's curse had returned, wearing a different face. The winds began to change once more, and with the arrival of Niazi, the village once again felt an unsettling shift. There were whispers at the markets, in the fields and by the river. The villagers spoke of Niazi's strange ways, his uncanny ability to charm and sway people, his cryptic manner of speech, and the way his presence seemed to make the earth itself tremble. Kwame knew that he could not let his guard down again. The serpent's curse may not have left, he muttered to himself as he stared at Niazi from a distance. This is how it begins, subtle, hidden, until it is too late. As the sun set behind the hills, casting long shadows over the village, Kwame felt a sense of dread settle over his heart. The story was not yet over. It was only just beginning again. Niazi, with his perfect charm and smooth words, quickly became a figure of influence in Ahama. He convinced the villagers that the world needed to change, that they needed to move beyond their old ways and embrace new ideas. Ideas that seemed harmless enough at first, but soon began to erode the villagers' customs. The young ones, eager for adventure and growth, followed him blindly. The elders, however, grew uneasy, sensing a hidden agenda. Kwame kept his distance from Niazi, but he noticed how the man's presence seemed to drain the life from the land. Crops began to wither, and the river, once bountiful, began to dry up in places. It was as if the land itself was mourning. Kwame's heart began to grow heavy with suspicion. He could feel the serpent's influence once again, creeping into the village like a silent poison. Niazi's charm was just a mask, and Kwame knew it. One evening, as the full moon now rose high above the village, Kwame followed Niazi into the grove. The air was thick with tension, and the wind howled like a distant cry. Kwame's steps were silent as he moved closer to the clearing where Niazi stood alone, staring at the stone statue of Zuria, the serpent who had once been a woman. Kwame's breath caught in his throat as he saw Niazi's eyes glow with an unnatural light. The man lifted his arms and the earth trembled beneath him. Slowly, Niazi began to shift, his form warping and twisting before Kwame's very eyes. "No," Kwame whispered, his voice hoarse with fear. "It cannot be." But it was. Niazi, the man who had charmed the village, was the serpent reborn, a creature of ancient power, bent on destruction. Kwame rushed forward, his hands trembling as he reached for his spear. "I will not let you take this village again," he shouted, his voice filled with rage. The serpent's eyes turned toward him, cold and calculating. "I have come to finish what was started," Niazi hissed, his voice no longer the pleasant tone of a man, but the deep, venomous hiss of a snake. "The earth is mine to claim, and this village will be my offering." With a roar, Kwame charged, his spear aimed at the serpent's heart. But Niazi was too quick, coiling his massive body around the elder, pinning him to the ground. The wind howled like a chorus of spirits, and the ground beneath them shook as the two battled, one with strength and wisdom, the other with ancient power and venomous fury. Kwame, though old, fought with the strength of 1,000 ancestors, his body fueled by the spirits that had once helped him defeat Zuria. But the serpent was cunning, and with every strike, it seemed to grow stronger. Kwame, in a moment of clarity, realized that he could not defeat the serpent with force alone. He needed the spirits to help him once again. With one final cry to the ancestors, Kwame felt the earth stir beneath him, calling upon the ancient forces of the land. The serpent screeched in agony as the ground erupted, sending cracks through the earth. The spirits of the land rose up, binding the serpent once more. The battle was fierce, but in the end, the serpent was once again trapped. Not in stone, but in the very soil of the earth. Kwame, breathless and broken, collapsed to his knees. The village was safe, but he knew the curse of the serpent would never truly end. It was a battle that would always come back, again and again. The village of Ahama, though victorious in its battle against the serpent's curse, was not the same. The air was heavy with grief, for many lives had been lost in the struggle. The ground that had once thrived with life now bore scars, cracks formed by the serpent's fury. Though the serpent was defeated once more, it seemed that the land itself mourned the loss of balance. Kwame, his body bruised and his heart weary, stood at the edge of the village, gazing out at the horizon. He had won the battle, but deep down, he knew the serpent's curse would rise again, and the people would not be ready unless they learned the true lesson of their past. He turned back toward the village and gathered the people under the baobab tree, where he had once told the story of the serpent's first arrival. Now he was the one who had to remind them of the wisdom passed down through generations. "We have defeated her," Kwame began, his voice hoarse but firm. "But we have not destroyed the curse. The serpent's power is not something that can be erased. It lives on, hidden beneath the surface of things, and we must be vigilant." As the seasons turned, the elders of Ahama, led by Kwame, worked tirelessly to teach the young ones the deeper meanings of the ancient stories. The villagers understood now that the serpent was not merely a monster, but a manifestation of something far greater. A force of nature, a reminder that the world was full of hidden dangers and ancient powers. "Do not trust what you see with your eyes alone," Kwame told them one evening. "The serpent teaches us that true wisdom is in understanding the unseen, the unspoken, and the unbroken cycles of nature." The young ones listened closely, absorbing every word. They understood now that the serpent had been a part of the world for centuries, that her curse had touched many villages long before Ahama. But what they had learned from Kwame was that with vigilance, unity, and respect for the balance of life, they could keep the serpent at bay. One night, as Kwame slept, he had a dream. The spirits of the land appeared before him, their faces glowing with a soft, ethereal light. The eldest spirit, a woman with eyes like the moon, spoke to him. "You have done well, Kwame, but the battle is never over. The serpent's curse is tied to the earth itself, and only those who understand its power can truly protect the land." Kwame bowed his head, knowing the weight of the spirit's words. "What must we do to break the cycle?" he asked. The spirit's gaze softened. "You must pass on the wisdom of the serpent, for she is both a destroyer and a teacher. Only through understanding her true nature will you be able to protect your village from her return." Kwame awoke with a start, his heart racing. He knew what he must do. He must continue to teach the villagers, passing down the lessons of the serpent and preparing them for the day when the curse would return once again. As the seasons changed, the village of Ahama seemed to grow quieter. The young ones, now more aware of the ancient forces around them, took up the mantle of guardianship. They were watchful, careful not to let the serpent's influence return. But the land was restless, and a new darkness seemed to stir in the distance. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, a young woman named Amara came to Kwame. She had heard the elder stories and felt the weight of the land's unrest. "Elder Kwame," she said, her voice trembling, "I have seen strange things in the forest. I feel that the serpent's curse is not gone. It is only waiting, hidden in the shadows." Kwame's heart sank as he listened to her. "The serpent is never truly gone, Amara. The land may be quiet now, but a shadow always lingers. The question is not if she will return, but when." Amara nodded, her eyes filled with determination. "I will stand with you, Elder. We will protect this village, no matter what comes." Kwame smiled softly, grateful for the bravery of the new generation. "It is good that you understand, Amara. The fight is not over, but we will face it together." The days grew longer, and the villagers noticed that the land was changing once again. Crops that had once flourished in the fertile soil began to wither, and animals grew thin, restless. The river, which had once flowed with abundance, began to dry up in patches. The signs were unmistakable. The serpent's influence was returning. Kwame gathered the elders once more under the baobab tree. The air was thick with foreboding, and the sky overhead seemed to darken with every passing day. "We knew this time would come," Kwame said, his voice heavy with the knowledge of ages. "The serpent has never been fully defeated. Her curse is tied to the earth itself, and as long as the land is troubled, she will rise again." The villagers were anxious, but Kwame's words brought them a sense of unity. "We must prepare," he continued, "not with swords or spears, but with wisdom. We will face the serpent, not with force, but with understanding." Amara, now a young leader in her own right, took it upon herself to find the source of the serpent's power. She had heard the whispers of the elders and the spirits of the land, and she believed that the key to breaking the cycle lay in the heart of the forest, where the serpent's curse had first been born. Accompanied by a small group of brave villagers, Amara ventured into the heart of the forest. The trees towered above them, their branches tangled and thick with age. The deeper they traveled, the more oppressive the air became, and soon they found themselves surrounded by an eerie silence. In the heart of the forest, they came upon a massive stone, ancient and covered with strange markings. Amara knelt before it, feeling the pulse of energy that radiated from the stone. She could sense that this was the source of the serpent's curse. It was here, in the heart of the earth, where the power of the serpent had first been birthed. Amara and her group began to chant the ancient rites passed down by the elders, their voices rising in harmony with the land. The stone responded, its markings glowing with a faint, otherworldly light. The ground trembled beneath them, and the forest seemed to come alive, swirling with ancient energy. For hours, they performed the ritual, calling upon the spirits of the land to release the serpent's curse. Slowly, the stone began to crack, and with a final, earth-shaking roar, the power of the serpent was released, but not destroyed. Amara knew then that the serpent would always return, but now she understood that it was not just an enemy to be fought. It was a force of nature, a part of the world that could never be fully eradicated. As Amara returned to the village, the villagers greeted her with relief. The land had begun to heal, and the signs of the serpent's curse were beginning to fade. But Kwame knew that this was only a temporary peace. The serpent is part of the world, Kwame said to Amara as they stood together beneath the baobab tree. But so too is the wisdom to face her. We will never be fully free of her, but we can stand together and face her with knowledge and courage. Amara nodded, her eyes filled with understanding. We will teach the next generation, and they will carry the wisdom forward. As the sun rose over Ahama, the villagers knew that their fight with the serpent would continue, but they were no longer afraid. They had the strength, the wisdom, and the unity to face whatever came next. Years passed, and Ahama flourished once again. The villagers had learned to live in harmony with the land, understanding the balance between light and dark, creation and destruction. But the memory of the serpent's curse was never far from their hearts. Kwame, now an elder of great renown, passed on his wisdom to the younger generation. He told them of the serpent, of the battle, and of the deep lessons of life and death that they had learned. The serpent is not evil, he would say. It is a teacher, showing us the way of the world. But remember, knowledge without understanding can bring great harm. Amara, now the village's new leader, continued to protect Ahama and guide its people. She understood that their strength lay not in their power, but in their unity and wisdom. The next generation of villagers, raised on the teachings of the elders and the legacy of the serpent's curse, grew into strong leaders. They learned the value of balance, respect for nature, and the need for vigilance. Each child who came of age was taught the stories of the serpent and the ancient rites, ensuring that the wisdom would never fade. The village of Ahama became a beacon of peace and prosperity, a place where the cycle of the serpent was understood, and the balance between the forces of nature was respected. On a quiet evening, as the stars began to shine brightly over the village, a young child came to Amara with a strange story. I saw a woman in a forest, the child said, eyes wide with wonder. She was beautiful, but her eyes, they were like the serpent's. Amara paused, her heart tightening. She had always known that the serpent's curse was never truly gone. The serpent may never leave us, she said softly, but we will be ready. As Amara gazed out at the peaceful village, she knew that the serpent cycle was a part of their world, forever intertwined with the land and its people. The story was not over. It had only just begun. The guardians of Ahama stood vigilant, their hearts filled with the wisdom of ages, ready to face whatever darkness the future might bring. They were united, and with that unity, they would continue to stand against the serpent's return, generation after generation. And so, the serpent's curse slumbered, waiting for the day it would rise again. But the village of Ahama stood unshaken, for they had learned the greatest truth. To live with the darkness is to live with wisdom. The battle was not won, nor lost, but forever woven into the fabric of their world. And thus, the cycle would continue until the next call to rise.